Energy Edge podcast. My name is Russ Bates, and today I'm joined by Peter Kelly. Pete, we've known each other for several years now. He is of Redtree Engineering, and he's going to talk about one of the biggest shifts happening in energy today, and that's with the data center power boom. These things need a lot of power, and it hurts the grid. It provides constraints and some complexity there. And how are we going to meet those demands? So, Peter, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Russ. Thank you. I appreciate the time. I appreciate including me in this. I just introduced myself. Peter Kelly, Pete Kelly. I started Redtree in 2022. And when we originally started the company, we were focused on we were focused on behind the meter CHP projects for industrial players. And over the last couple of years, this data center play has become, it's come about as a really critical piece of the energy mix. And I come out of the power industry, 20 years in the power industry, designing power plants all over the world. Some very large facilities, utility based. But what we're seeing now kind of outstripes everything that was over the last 20 plus years of my career in terms of excitement, demand, and challenge. So, great topic, and great to be here.
Now we're really pleased to have you here. So let's dive in to this because there's so much to talk about. So with AI, with the data centers, with the cloud, crypto mining, all of these kind of things, those require a lot of power. Can you give some general ideas of what that's going to look like for, let's say, a typical data center, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So you kind of the thing that's caught all of us by surprise over the last 12 to 16 months is the rapid expansion in the power demand for the data centers, primarily behind the new generation of NVIDIA chips. Everybody sees NVIDIA on the stock market and their story, and their chipset has increased the power demand in the data center significantly. So much so that, say, in the 2023, 2024 timeframe, 20 megawatt data center, and they rate the data centers in megawatt usage on the IT load. But a 20 megawatt data center was a fairly normal, robust, and that's expanded to 100 megawatt for a data center, where now you've got some of the hyperscalers who are looking for a gigawatt plus of campus load for a major facility. So one example of that is the recently announced project outside of Pittsburgh, where Kiewit and GE are building a data center campus, and I think it's something like 4 gigawatts plus of power. Massive five H-frame machines in one-on-one capacity, and that's on the big side of things. But you're still seeing 100, 200, 300 megawatt facilities as some of the co-locators, some of the people who are leasing sites, both to the hyperscaler players as well as to some of the smaller players. So it's been a dramatic shift over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's not just that computing power, right? It's definitely the computer components, if you will, but it's also the heat dissipation and the HVAC load. Are those kind of equal in power needs, or is one like 60% and another's 40? Or
I guess the kind of the more important way to think about this is you've got the IT load, and then you've got the grid power load. And they use a factor to qualify between how much compute load you need and how much grid power you need. And it can go all the way up to 1.5 factors. So if I say I need 100 megawatts of IT load, of compute load, you may need 150 megawatts. Now, the interesting thing, and one of the challenges for us on the power industry side, that if we've looked at stable load and stable load profiles, these loads can vary dramatically throughout the year, seasonality on some of the cooling like you talked about, but particularly on AI workloads, they can shift dramatically within milliseconds. There's a recent issue coming out of Virginia where the IT where the data centers took themselves off of the grid very suddenly because they had a spike in power and they had to shift over to their own power, and that caused the grid operator a significant amount of trouble because all of a sudden you had a major load major load in the grid come out of the grid, and that causes instability throughout the grid. So it's a really dynamic situation that both on the data center side as well as the power industry side, everybody is struggling to understand because it's moving so rapidly. One, depending on whose study you look at, we're looking at anywhere from 70 to 130 gigawatts of new generation capacity needed by 2030. So this is a demand. This is an increase in power demand, unlike anything we've seen in all of the history of the power industry.
And that says a lot, right? I mean, that's an incredible statement. And when you think about it, it just makes sense. There's just so much more of this. So whenever you work with developers and owners and help them to figure these things out, what are they looking at when they decide, all right, let's put a new data center in whatever state? How do they decide which state, which place to site, and kind of that process? Can you run us through that real quick?
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest attractors to a given location, it's always going to be first access to fiber and the long haul fiber that you're looking for to get into the internet connections. Depending on the workload that they're using, proximity to a major population area is necessary. There are some data centers that are more storage oriented, more of a stable load. Those can be a little bit further out, but you still have to be near fiber or fiber that can inexpensively be brought to the site. You have to have power available. What we talk about is it in terms of powered land. So you have to have power from the grid, or what's happening in a lot of cases is you're having groups talk about behind the meter power, and that's a lot of what we've been helping clients find their way through. We'll look at what that would look like, do some feasibility, whether that's a bridge to eventually getting grid power. But one of the challenges is you've got these data center clients who are desperately trying to get these facilities up and running in the next 12 to 24 months as the build cycle of the buildings go. And you've got utility interconnects that, on a good year were, 2 years to do a study, a stability study, a grid stability study to get in the queue. Now those queue times, even before this boom, had already been pushed out. On the PV solar connections, we were seeing, as of 2020, 21, we were seeing grid queue times go from what was traditionally 18 months, 2 years, out to 3 years, 4 years. And at this point now, between electrification, EV infrastructure, the PV infrastructure trying to come online, a grid connection, both either for load or for generation, can be 5 to 10 years. That's assuming that the utility actually has the generation capacity to feed the load.
Right.
So in many cases, if we're talking large facilities, large campuses, there's no generation out there. Help's not coming. The grid can't support the need. So one of my thesis is that the data centers are going to have to build their own power, and they're going to have to interconnect to the grid and do that in an intelligent way that both helps support the grid, but also gives them control over the reliability, what they call 5 nines reliability, 99.999% reliability for their data loads, and the redundancy that gets installed into that. And one of the interesting points to that is the data centers, that's what they're looking for from reliability, but the grid on its best day is 99.6. So this interplay between the rapid response that the data centers need because their workloads come up and down, particularly in the AI loads, the reliability that they need on the 5 nines, or depending on the installation. And then what the grid can provide, on the other hand, you've got two industries that have been talking past each other for the last 18 months, and not and they're being forced together because they have to. They each one depends on the other for their survival and their reason for being. But there's a lot of people in the industry are spending a lot of time trying to find ways to get those two industries to talk well together.
Yeah, it's communication is a very important thing. Like anything else, it's common sense, right? They should be talking, but I understand what you're saying, that they don't always do that. So it's
Well,
is it something?
yeah, I think even more than even more than talking together, it's using the same terms and the same expectations. And you've got a 100+ years of the power industry that has kind of set up a way of serving the load with reserve margins, and where the utilities will go through their studies on how load growth is going to happen, modeling load growth, modeling the stability of the grid, and making these very careful evaluations on where power can go and how much power is needed, and what the economics are to make it for out of a due diligence and protection of the ratepayers, and all these good things that the utility industry has been built on. Reliability first, and then you got the data center that needs this ultra reliable power, ultra grade reliable power, and is growing at a rate that it just kind of blows away the expectations of load growth on the utility grid. And it's that expectation of the data center saying, well, but I need 500 megawatts in 2 years, and the utility industry saying, can't have it. And
Yeah.
and how do you solve that problem? How do we get together to solve that unexpected problem that's developed over the last 2 years?
So there's a ton of electricity that's needed for these data centers. And it really, I guess there's two pieces. One, it's maybe some behind the meter stuff, which I want to talk to, which would really need to be a blend for this type of consumption. But then kind of that elephant in the room, so to speak, the grid is maxed out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned the interconnection problems as far as that time frame. I think you said, Pete, that a lot of these projects they're wanting to have completed, built, and have the electricity there in the 18 to 24 months. But you still got 24 plus months for interconnection for some of the generation projects. So you got a real log jam of what's going on. So the biggest constraints you see whenever we're talking about the grid, whether it's for these types of projects or in general, what do you see, and do you see a clear way to overcome those?
Yeah, I think the bridging power behind the meter is a significant part of this. I think kind of the data we've looked at, the thesis we have is at Redtree, is that of that demand, of that depending on how you look at it, whether it's let's call it 100 gigawatts of demand, that's kind of right straight down the middle. We think all of the utilities together doing their thing and putting their resource plans out, and they're all building massive facilities, and they're trying to do as much as they can, as fast as they can. And there's a real boom in utility combined cycles right now. I think they'll reach maybe 20% of the demand, maybe 25% of the demand. And then you can layer in, on top of all the utilities, you can layer in the merchant players, the IPPs, the developers who are producing their own power, whether it's behind the meter adjacent with a facility, or even on a merchant basis. That may take another 20 to 25%. So you've got the entire power industry, all of us working flat out 60-hour weeks for the next 5 years, and you might cover 60 to 70% of the pent up demand. So there's a constraint on just the number of craft labor, the number of engineering firms, the number of, whatever component parts to get the project, the major players to get the projects. There's two other constraints right now. A vast majority of this work is going to have to be natural gas So, gas supply and proximity to gas is an important thing. We'll also include, there's going to be a really significant portion of PV continued build. I mean, there's been a huge boom in PV over the last number of years. I think this is going to continue that boom that I think otherwise might have flattened out. There's a constraint right now on turbine supply for gas turbine supply,
Yeah,
as well as a constraint for breakers and substation transformers.
sure.
Where turbine supplies, the major turbines are sold out through 2030 now. So we've got this 100 gigawatt boom that we've got to cover by 2030 is when the demand comes in, and you've got the projects that have turbines, and then you've got all these other projects that need an answer. SMRs may be part of that. If we can build nuclear fast enough, PV will be part of that. Battery storage will be part of that. Biomass, converting old coal plants. There's all sorts of answers out there. And my thesis is it's going to be all of the above. That without all of the above, we're going to be lucky to get to 60 or 70% of that demand.
Yeah, and kind of some timely news. I guess it was it last week or the week before, late the week before, the new administration talked about wanting to revive the coal generation, coal-fired plants and the generation there, which I don't see any new. I'd be surprised if new coal plants are built to do electricity generation, but I could see some of these, probably several of them, maybe staying online longer than expected to help with some of that. So that may be, but again, that's still not going to get enough of what this greater consumption rate is it?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I was at the data center conference last week, one of the major data center conferences in DC. And, a lot of the discussion there centered around that this will really govern. This is a governor on the rate of growth of the data centers. So the data center demand is there. It's real. It's got cash behind it. But the lack of our ability to build enough power will limit the number of projects. That will be the governing factor. And, there will be winners and losers on the data center side from that. People who have turbines will have projects. People who have contracts with the utilities will have projects. They may not go as fast as they want them, but they'll have the project. Whereas I expect there to be people who can't get online until well after 2030. There are two factors I think that might mitigate that, which are good. One is because the demand for the power that's being listed as nameplate tends to not be fully utilized throughout most of the year. And because it can vary from site to site, that as the projects come together in the grid, if we can get the grid built, you may be able to see a kind of a next development of a distributedly connected grid where these major facilities are the major power islands, and that they can spare 20 or 30% of their generation capacity into the grid to help stabilize the load, right? So these as the utilities and the data centers start to speak more closely and do more planning, I think there's a real opportunity for the data centers to be the next group of generation assets that the utilities can use to stabilize the grid. So that's one area that we're doing a lot of looking and modeling and studying with our clients to see, where that can help cover that last 40%, 30 or 40% of capacity. I don't think it's going to get natively handled by build.
Yeah.
The other thing that could happen is the chips could get more efficient, and the power management on the data center side could get better. This is things they're actively working on that side of the equation in order to manage with the power that they have. Now, I did speak a few weeks ago with one of the lead engineers for one of the hyperscalers, and I posed that thesis to him. I said, well, is this indicating we might be in a bubble? His comment was, build it, and we will come, because if the chip gets more efficient, we'll just build more racks. We'll fill up whatever capacity you have. That's where they're at. They have enough workload, enough computer tasks that they want to do, enough innovative ideas that they understand the constraints of the build and the infrastructure. But if they can get the infrastructure, they have things to utilize it for, which is just a fascinating aspect of this.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty big deal for them to say, hey, if we need 100 megawatts right now, but the chips advance and they're more efficient, and we only need 75 megawatts, we still want the 100 megawatts because we'll just put in more
Right.
data
Yep.
center space, more hardware, more of what they need there. So no, that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this too, Pete, because like we work on a lot of commercial and industrial scale projects, and I always think that the utility, it would make a lot of sense for them to, if let's say you have a manufacturing facility. Let's say this manufacturing facility needs like a megawatt of power for their needs, but they've got enough room for like a 1.5 megawatt system or maybe some ground space, and you can put 2 or 3 megs there. Wouldn't that be great? Again, it goes to interconnection and everything involved there. But wouldn't it be great for the general public, so to speak, the private sector, to be able to send those electrons out and help the utility put it on the grid and help with some of this stuff to offset, maybe capture that other 25-30%? Is that something you guys are seeing, or is that a tough bridge to cross?
We haven't seen it yet. I think it's a really good, well thought out application though, and I think it would have a lot of merit, particularly if it's a renewable credit that you can offer to a data center. I mean, they all have continue to have corporate commitments that they live to, that they would like to fulfill. So, renewable energy to layer on top of base load is more than welcome. And that's what I'm saying is this is a all of the above kind of moment, right? And it's
Right.
and the kind of that way lies the solution is in that grid interconnect. One of the really exciting things I saw recently was I think there was an announcement that there were some groups that were using AI to help facilitate the grid application process and the grid modeling process. For those who have gotten involved of it, and you know that you do your grid application and then it goes to a grid modeling process where there's a constraint model, and out of that constraint model, if we inject a certain amount of generation in this location, the wiring between here and a different load might overload, and so we're going to have to increase we're going to have to reconductor that load or add a second route. Those models are very intricate, and they're iterative processes in order to develop those. And it's that's careful work, and it's there's a limited body of people in the country who know how to do that, who are part of that economy. And if we can tailor some AI tools to help them, to help accelerate that, then that will be that could be a significant advantage. I mean, I'll give you a concrete example. In 2021, I was working with a small co-op utility that was used to they were used to getting grid applications, generation applications, 20 a year. And at that time in 2021, because of the PV install and the PV build out, they were up to about 100 a year. So they were five times capacity on what they could handle in terms of just processing the application, and never mind getting it over to get to the ISO to get it modeled. And that constraint was already in place, was already pending and building up over the last X number of years. So, yeah, anything that can help alleviate that, that can help get people out and actually building the wires and building the transmission is going to help on the generation side, immensely.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, AI a year ago, that's not something I was using, right? I knew about it and this and that, but I didn't apply it. And then I started to use it. I was like, huh, let me try this. And I was amazed at how much more efficient it made my work. You just put the stuff in there, let it check, like a contract, for example. I'm going to read through them. I'm going to have our attorneys read through them, but it's really easy to just put something in there, like you get an NDA or a master service agreement or something. Put it in there and say, hey, because they learn you, right? They understand what you're doing, and what the more you use it, the better they kind of learn who you are and what you need. But it can do that, just like that. It
Yeah.
saves, I don't know how many hours of time.
Yeah.
So that's great. It would make so much sense. And I'm sure the minds are out there that could do that for that permitting and all those interconnection studies and everything that goes
Right.
along with that. So
Right.
let's say that happens. You brought up another point that I think is a very viable issue to address, and that's who's going to build this. I'm an IBEW electrician by trade. I haven't worked my tools in like 20 years, and I know that it's becoming a bit tougher to pull people into doing that skilled labor. So I guess the hands that we need to build these things is the next problem. Is that something you see as we've
I,
got all these other ones, but how significant do you think that would be?
yeah, I do. And if you look at the major construction players, as well as the engineering players who have traditionally served the power industry, they're full. They're 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 um, they're carefully selecting the projects that best fit their profile and it, long-term clients and things like that. So, the 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 need is already showing up there, but the pure craft labor and the need for the bodies to string the copper and hang the steel and route the pipe is absolutely a constraint, and
Yeah.
there's only so much technology that can help there. On the engineering side, I think there's some duplication, some replication. I've had some really successful projects in my career where we designed a project in one location and we built it in two locations, and it would, you can carefully address that, and we were able to do it successfully. And so there's kind of efficiencies of scale that you can do on the engineering side, but on the material supply and the construction craft labor, those are challenges we're going to face, and making sure, and I applaud the groups and the labor groups and that are out there trying to encourage kids to go into the trades. I think it's a phenomenal way to earn a living, and then noble. It's a noble profession, and it's something I've always thoroughly supported. And but it's going to be in high demand. I mean, I think those skilled trades are going to be in high demand at least for the next, 20 years. I recently had a family party where I think it was my uncle's 40th wedding anniversary, and I have a first cousin who's a Highline guy. He's a traveler. He goes, chases the storms and gets utilities back online when the storms come by.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this boom, and I said, John, you're gonna be busy till you retire. There's projects. So you can start talking about where you want to work, not what you want to work on. So is
Right.
it close to home? Is it got something to do in the weekend? Those are going to be the kinds of questions that some of the craft labor are going to be going after.
It'll be like those EPCs and firms that are picking what projects do they want to
Mm.
go after. Yeah, I agree. Well, Pete, this has been a great discussion. I've got one more question before we wrap up. So that would be, if you could give advice to developers, utilities, policymakers, even to try to get ahead of the curve on this. We're probably behind the curve already, but
Yes,
to help
we
me
are.
maybe catch up, what's one piece of advice that you would like to give any one of these or all of them to help make this situation better?
Sure, sure. Well, it first of all is talk to the utility. Talk to the utility, and if you're a utility, talk to the end user data center client, and start building those relationships. Start talking on an operational level, on a technical level, between engineers on how the facility is going to operate and how you can support each other. The second, from a developer and from a project execution point of view, get the team lined up early. Get the engineering, get the construction commitment, and get the equipment commitment, get the long lead equipment uh, selected and deposits paid as early as you possibly can. And for the finance and the funders, that's a key piece of it. And I think if you look at it and look at your own numbers and see the projections on what this demand is versus what the carrying capacity of our industry is, you will see that there are going to be people who aren't going to be able to get their projects built. And the number one way you can get your project built is get equipment on order. It might not be the lead time you want. It might be longer than you need, but get it on order, get the money put down, get your slot. That's probably right now the biggest, most important thing is paying attention to supply chain, not only on the manufacturing, but also on the services and the construction side.
Yeah, I think the procurement is, like you mentioned, going to be such an important piece of that puzzle.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
agreed. Well, Pete, I really appreciate you taking the time. And before we sign off here, where can our listeners find you or connect with you to learn more about, Redtree
Yeah.
Engineering and the work that you're doing in this space?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we do a lot of feasibility studies for developers. We've got some work we do with utilities. We do a lot of behind the meter studies, and we've got some detailed design projects we're doing to support data centers for combined cycle. Probably the easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, Pete Kelly, and then Redtree Engineering, Redtree one word, or you can get me on email. It's peter.kelly@csi-ing.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm sure you're going to have some people reaching out. And as time goes on, probably a lot more. So we'll want to revisit this here down the road and see how things are playing out. And hopefully a lot of these solutions are coming to fruition. And the data centers and all the TikTok videos that we watch have a safe home and we can access them easily, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Peter Kelly, thanks so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Russ. I appreciate it.
Thanks.